Hello, I wanted to take some time to go over the basics of MLA. This sort of corresponds to part 1 of the MLA book, so we will get going. So the first thing I wanted to show you is this example of what the MLA format looks like. So you can go to Purdue OWL and you can look at a very detailed MLA paper, and it breaks down what everything is and what the margins should be. This is also a really great example. So your name, my name, the class name, the date, no extra spaces, the title, no extra spaces, indent, the paper begins. And then you can see kind of down here where we have the richest in quotation marks within the parentheses. There's a parenthetical documentation. Here is some excellent attributive work according to the PBS documentary, The Richest Man in the World, Andrew Carnegie. And then it's going to give the information from the source, and it is a paraphrase. So this will kind of give you just a little quick snippet to look at, but we're going to look at these things more in depth. So let's get to that. One of the things that comes through with research is that all of us have bias. I don't care who you are, you have a bias about something. So I have them and you have them too. That's normal. What we want to do is we want to learn how to recognize that we have those biases so that they don't trickle over into our writing. So if we're aware that we're biased, then that helps us avoid that within our writing. However, we also know that we live in a world where bias is used all the time. And we have on every major news network people whose job it is to come and give their opinion or to give their bias about something, and they get paid for that. So we sort of reward bias in a way in our country. So with, op-ed and talking heads and things like that. So journalists and journalism, that's one part of the media. But then we have this other part of the media, which is commentators, and they are paid to talk about their bias. So that's something to keep in mind. We want to kind of steer not clear of it, because everyone's going to have a little bit of bias, but we want to make sure that we're kind of in the middle. So this is a chart that you maybe have seen. It's updated yearly. This one is from 2018. So you can Google the 2020 media bias chart. And some things have moved a little, and there's a few more sources that have been put on here. So let's look at this kind of for a second. So up at the top here, it's talking about the bias. So over here on the left, we have the most extreme liberal, and then over here on the right, the most extreme conservative. So, and I'm sure that all of us have seen articles from these magazines and newspapers on Facebook or Instagram or whatever. But we need to know that they're leaning very far to the left and or very far to the right. So then on the vertical key over here, we have, of course, at the top, those sources which really are trying to give us fact. And at the top, it's original. So they're the ones who've done the research. They're the ones who have created that evidence through study and investigation. And then we go down the column here, and it goes all the way down to fact reporting and then analysis, and that's what you're going to be doing. You're going to be analyzing facts and information in order to present a researched solution. So opinion comes after that down here, and fair persuasion. So this is us, this complex analysis, opinion, and fair persuasion. So we're not going to lie. We're not going to skew statistics. We're going to be truthful. We're going to be honest. If there's problems with our proposals, we're going to say, hey, there's a few problems. Let's talk about those. And so it's after this, on the vertical column, that the information starts getting a little questionable. And I confess to this every year. I love the HuffPost. I love BuzzFeed. I also love the Daily Mail and New York Post. So these are sources that have like really clickbait type titles, and they're rarely filled with facts and real evidence. So it's fun to play around with those, but you want to make sure that you're kind of up here in this more fact-driven, analysis-driven grouping. So notice we've got CNNs kind of down here. It's just right on the line. And then we have Politico, the BBC, the New York Times, the Post, the Wall Street Journal, all of these sources that we know are reliable and trustworthy up here at the top. And then, so we have CNN kind of here on the line, and then Fox News actually is on the next line. So these are probably, as far as major news outlets go, not the ones we want to use. So they both very obviously lean. So we want to be up here in the top. So again, this is a older chart, so there's some new stuff on the newer one. I think you may have to pay for the new one, which, you know, I'm a poor teacher. So, all right, so let's come up to the next slide. So another thing you want to be concerned with as you're moving information from your sources over into your paper is you want to make sure that you don't plagiarize. So most students understand plagiarism and they know they're not supposed to do it, but most students end up doing it. What happens, I think, is that you know you're not supposed to plagiarize, and so whenever you're putting a direct quotation into your paper, there's the quotation marks that kind of remind you, oh, this is a source. I need to make sure I have my parenthetical documentation. But I think when you start summarizing things and paraphrasing things, that's when it breaks down a little bit because you're using your own words. So I don't need to document this. It's in my own words. True, it should be in your own words, but it's not your idea. So therefore, it still needs to be documented. So as the slide says, summaries, paraphrases, and direct quotes all need to be documented. Documentation should occur in the text of the paper and on the works cited page, and it should be obvious to the reader via the in-text documentation which source on the works cited page contains that information. So let's look at that a little more in depth. So I like to think of this as the Hansel and Gretel aspect of research and documentation. So your in-text documentation really is like a breadcrumb trail down to that works cited page where all your sources are listed. So you want to make that clear and easy to follow. You don't want to get lost in the woods of research. You want to make it clear for that reader to get down there to the end. So in order to do that, what you want to make sure you're doing is, so here on the left is a chunk of text that has been borrowed and has been documented. So imagine this is in a research paper. We have Danoff 7 down here. So when I go to the works cited page, I see Danoff, clearance H. So I immediately know that this information comes from this particular source. So if the student had put change here, but it was Danoff clearance H, I would have to hunt for that. Or if the student had put Harvard here, that's way down in the end of the works cited entry. So you want to make sure that whatever you have as the very first thing, and it should be the author's last name if the source has an author, is the thing that you're using in the parenthetical citation. So this is an example of intentional plagiarism. So I'm trying to keep moving my face out of the way of the slides. Perhaps I should not show my face in the next slideshow I do. Everyone would probably enjoy that. So here's the original source. It's from the Columbia Literary History of the United States. It's written by Wendy Martin, and this particular blurb is on page 625. So here it is. Some of Dickinson's most powerful poems express her firmly held conviction that life cannot be fully comprehended without an understanding of death. So at the bottom, we see what the student has put into their paper. Emily Dickinson firmly believed we cannot fully comprehend life unless we also understand death. And it's pretty much word for word, and it's also the idea. So both instances of plagiarism are there. There's no attribution, there's no documentation, so there's nothing here if this were isolated in a paper to show that the student ever looked at the Columbia Literary History of the United States. So you want to make sure that you make that connection to the source. So let's look at what it would look like if it were documented. So here we have some attribution that builds your ethos. It's always a good idea to tell us about your authors. Let us get to know them a little bit before you just start throwing around information. So as Harvard Professor of American Studies, Wendy Martin has suggested, Emily Dickinson firmly believed we cannot appreciate life unless we also appreciate death. And we've got the page number. And then when the instructor scrolls down to the works cited page, we're going to see Martin, Wendy. So we immediately know she is the author of the information that was borrowed in the paper. So it's pretty simple. And I think if you just stick with that idea that whatever I put in my parenthetical citation, I have to mimic that with the works cited entry. And as long as you're using the MLA 8th edition templates to create your works cited, you're going to be fine. So, of course, sometimes you're not going to have a author, but you'll have a title, and you want to use the title of the article, not the title of the website. So, and then you would use a keyword from that title inside your parenthetical documentation. So I'll let you flip through this little blurb here. So you want to make sure that you dog ear page 20 of the MLA book. That's where the core elements of a works cited page entry are listed. So if you dog ear that or put one of those little flags on it, you'll always be able to get to it. So if, you know, your citation machine or whatever isn't working, you can come to page 20 and you can manually create a works cited entry that's going to be pretty correct. So that's just a real general overview of in-text and works cited page documentation. Of course, there are exceptions to these rules and lots of things that are different, but you have the MLA book to help you with those. So, thanks.